Man, this is like walking back in time. I was just a kid back then, 23 years old, an aspiring photojournalist shooting photos for a local newspaper. They said, "Take some pictures out there." It was supposed to be a one-day gig.
Yeah, I think it was about here. Yeah, it was right out in this area. People started coming in droves all over this field. It was amazing. They were spilling out over the fence line, over this road, and that fence line.
Back then, Boulder was this hotbed of liberal politics, hippies, counterculture. It was Boulder's heyday. Everyone was here to protest nuclear weapons and the arms race. There were over 5,000 people.
Shut down the nukes, shut them down, sing it out just a little bit louder. Shut down the nukes, shut them down, sing it out just a little bit louder. Shut down the nukes, shut them down, and again a whole lot louder. Shut down the nukes.
That water tower in the background is the Rocky Flats plant. Rocky Flats was a nuclear weapons factory. They made the heart of the bomb, the plutonium trigger used to detonate a nuclear warhead. Afterwards, about 100 people decided to spend the night on the railroad tracks. They wanted to do a symbolic one-night blockade of the trains running into the plant. That night it got really cold. It rained and snowed. The next morning I shot some photos and left. I just assumed that it was over. These doves they'd released at the concert just stayed with them. But later that day, a group of 35 diehards decided to spend another night. They set up this tarp and started to talk about not leaving.
Just sitting on the railroad tracks. No more trains, radioactive trains.
They were all packed in there. In the middle of that flimsy structure was Daniel Ellsberg. He was the whistleblower who'd exposed the government's lying about Southeast Asia. He'd leaked the Pentagon Papers that helped end the Vietnam War and impeach Nixon. He was an ex-Marine and a military analyst. He was a planner. How can a small group stand up to the whole government? They spent another night. It's like they were declaring, "We're not leaving." They even put up this mailbox that had their name on it, the Rocky Flats Truth Force. It's from Sanskrit, from Gandhi. When a law is unjust, you have to stand up for the higher law, truth. They all knew the cops were coming. They just didn't know when. So they waited and waited. Then, in the middle of this snowstorm, the cops came.
You're under arrest.
We think the power of the people is what will ultimately close Rocky Flats and other facilities like this. And until we end this, we're going to be back and back again.
After all the waiting and being so cold, there was this feeling of celebration on the bus taking them to jail.
They can't find enough rooms in all the jails to find all the people who snap nuclear weapons and nuclear power. And they find out.
I assumed that was the end of it. Everyone did. Getting arrested was a big deal, especially at a weapons facility on government property. But Ellsberg inspired people. He'd say, "Ask yourself, what can I do about the nuclear arms race or any injustice if I'm willing to go to jail?" Tough question, but there's a power in that realization. They went right back out there again. It had just snowed over 2 feet. They went further in so the cops couldn't find them. They started building this snow fort. They were back in planning mode. They all realized their biggest challenge was the risk of just petering out. You get in the newspaper for a couple days, but then you fade away. So how do you build momentum? Build a movement. The next day, they saw their opportunity. Everyone started running across the snow onto the railroad tracks. That's Ellsberg in the middle with the cowboy hat. No one knew the train was filled with cops. They all got arrested again. And yep, again I expected that'd be the end of it. But again, they came right back out. By then it was summer. When someone got arrested, others would take their place.
All we have is borrowed from generations yet to come. What we leave them is our choice. Let us answer in one voice.
Barley groots I scatter on your reactor's core. I call your name with hollow vowels. I psalm your fate close by. My breath near deathless ever at your side to spell your destiny. I set this verse.
Then Allen Ginsberg showed up. He was one of the most famous poets of the time. He was the voice of the counterculture. They walked down the tracks and they waited and meditated. Rocky Flats and the protests kept getting in the news, the local, national, and international news. These photos got out there. Rolling Stone, Harper's, The Atlantic, the New York Times. 50 days went by. 100 days went by. More people kept showing up. On August 9th, they staged a protest. At exactly 11:02, the time the atomic bomb fell on Nagasaki, they all fell down dead. All of a sudden, we realized how the bomb dropped on Nagasaki killed over 50,000 people. All the newspapers and TV stations were there.
In no other business than to add the capability to initiate nuclear war, that is, to initiate genocide.
And Ellsberg kept talking to the press. We already have 30,000 nuclear bombs. We're building more bombs as fast as we can so the Russians won't bomb us. That's insane. Besides the big group protests, there were lots of individuals who made a huge impact. Brother Sawada was a Zen monk who came from Japan to pray for closing Rocky Flats. He'd walked the 10 miles out to Rocky Flats from Boulder, chanting and drumming for peace. The teepee on the tracks became this iconic landmark. People driving by would honk and wave. And when cops arrested them, they just set up the teepee further down the tracks. A small group camped out there and kept the occupation going through the summer, through the fall, through the winter. It's amazing remembering all this. It was such a heady time. The nuclear meltdown at 3 Mile Island had just happened. All the newspapers and TV stations were there. All the It's amazing remembering all this. It was such a heady time. The nuclear meltdown at 3 Mile Island had just happened. The occupation ended after 264 days, but it wasn't over. They were planning an even bigger protest. With all the news that had gotten out, organizers were hoping the turnout would be as big as the previous year. The crowd was big, 3 times larger than the year before. 15,000 people, the biggest anti-nuclear weapons rally ever. All that hard work had paid off. Helen Caldecott spoke, Holly Near sang. The crowd gave Ellsberg a standing ovation.
I thought I could give it to the Rocky Flats Truth Force or the Bail Fund or something. The message is, we have the power in this country to save ourselves and all the children of the world, this city, this earth, our garden, our home. Thanks for being here.
Jackson Browne and Bonnie Raitt played. Thinking back, I feel so lucky I got to be part of that. It was an incredible time. There was this sense of, even as a small group, together we can make a difference. And they did.
This is United States government property. You are not allowed by law to come onto this property. You will be subject to arrest on trespass by Donegan and Japan of 1954.
But I know that life's already seen. Yours and mine. And I just late 27.